Hello. All right, nod your heads if you can hear me. Okay, cool. So first thing is, as people are joining into the classroom, we don't want you to freak about the test tomorrow, or we're gonna open it up today. You're gonna have until Sunday night to finish it. You can stop, go away from it, come back, use your resources, okay? It's got a lot of hints on the actual questions themselves. So this is just supposed to be a way for you to earn some easy test points to put into your test average about trig. Okay, so when we go over the problems, just keep that in mind that you guys are totally allowed to go and use other resources, to look and use the hints, to have your unit circle or your little chart of what the angles are for sine, cosine, and tangent up with you, right next to you, have your calculators nearby if that helps. And you have 3 days to take the test. So you can do it in pieces, you can do it in one sitting, it's fine. All of that should work really well. So the goal is for everybody to get a nice high chapter score into their chapter grades for another test score. That's the goal. Cool. Wow, we're getting so many people. This is exciting. Like, we've never had this many people together before. Everybody doing okay? Anybody want to turn on their mic and say hi?
Hi.
Hello. Hi. Ashley's afraid to say hi. Ashley number 1 is afraid to say hi.
Hi,
Ashley number 2 isn't, though.
I know. I like that. Hi, Jacob.
Hi, Jacob.
Is it bad that I miss, like, making fun of Jacob and, like, causing a disruption?
Well, we're all right here right now. What's to stop us now? See?
Actually, I'm going to take a picture of you right now.
You're going to take a picture of Ashley's? Your lighting behind you, it looks so pretty. It's all like blue behind you.
Thank you. I just got it.
It's so aesthetic.
I just put it in. Look, hold on. It's cool. We love that. I'm
Yeah,
really
that's
happy.
very cool. All right, so did everybody go and join mathspace.co and actually get yourself set up there? Because there's a couple things that are a little bit weird about the site. The first one is it doesn't use your Google login. You actually have to put in your first name, last name, and you actually have to create an account on your own. Okay, so that information was on the Google Classroom. So we want to make sure you do that. So let me see if I can kind of show you how to do that. Give me 1 second here. Mirror. Try that. Okay, and then go back to Zoom and do a share screen. There we go. All right, so if I go on to the website, so it's mathspace.co, and I try to log in. Down at the very bottom of the screen, it says join a class or log in. So if this is your very first time, which for most of us, for me it was, I picked the join the class, and then I gave you the class code in the Google Classroom. If you're period 3, it starts with a Y. If you're period 4, it starts with a B, and that's just to help me with reporting. You're going to put that in, and then you're going to click the part that says create a new account if you haven't done it already. Okay, after you put in the class code. Okay, and then it's going to ask you for your first name, last name. Use the one that's in your normal grade book type of thing on Infinite Campus, your school email, and then you make up a password. I would recommend that you use the same password that you do for Google so that you don't have to worry about remembering what it is. And then you're going to join the class. At the end of our video conference, it's going to go live. It's already set up to go live at 11:45. So if it doesn't go live at 11:45, I want you to just drive me crazy with emails so that I can make sure that it gets up and running as soon as possible for you guys. So that's the biggest thing of how to get into this. So this is a different software package. It works best so far, we found out, on a desktop versus a iPad or a tablet. So if you have the ability, even if you have to wait for parents to get off of the laptop until later in the evening, I would definitely suggest you do that. It's much easier if you do it on a desktop type of computer that has an actual keyboard than trying to use a tablet. If you use a tablet, it almost automatically goes straight to where you actually have to type with a stylus instead of a keyboard. And that becomes a real big pain because it doesn't recognize symbols very nicely. It's a little bit clunky. So the most you can do for that possible, do that. iPad worked okay, but it took me probably 3 times longer than it should have had I used a desktop, just because I'm horrible at typing and having it recognize stuff. So if you're better at your skills of like writing and having it recognize symbols, that might work better. And then I tried it on my phone. I have an iPhone. It would not even let me get near it. It just says it's not supported. Okay, so if you can, even if it means waiting until later in the evening, there's no rush to this. You don't have to do it during our class period time. You just have to have it done by Sunday at midnight. Okay, and then you can enjoy your week off and not have to worry about anything related to HBC for the whole week. So that's the goal for this Sunday being the deadline. Cool. All right, so what types of things are on the test? So it's going to be everything. I got a couple emails from people that said, can you please go over a few of these types of things? So let me go back to sharing my screen again, and we'll go over a couple questions. And then for sure, if you have a question type that we have not gone over, ask it either in the chat right now, and I will keep that up on my screen so that I can see what's going on. Or as we're doing it, turn on your mic and ask me a question. That's totally okay. You can also, some teachers are like, please raise your hand, you know, so that I see it going. When I switch over to share the screen, that I don't always get to see you guys on the side. So probably the easiest is to just turn on your mic and then just ask me the question. All right, so. All right, so I am actually looking through the questions that are on the test when I go over these, okay? So the first one it's going to ask you are types like this, where they're going to give you a, ooh, let's not do that. Let's use an actual pen. They're going to give you an actual triangle. They're going to tell you what 2 sides are of it. And they're going to put a little theta symbol right there. And they're going to ask you what is sine of theta. They might ask you what is x equal to. They might ask you, let's see, what else? They might ask you what tangent of theta is equal to, right? So for all of those, it's back for my lesson where we did SOHCAHTOA. And I want to handle one of the people's questions. Now, most of them at the very beginning are main trig functions. So in order, the main trig functions are sine of theta, cosine of theta, tangent of theta. We always write them in this order because remember, tangent is just sine over cosine. So you could just take whatever this answer is, put it over that one, and then just simplify, okay? Somebody asked, what about those weird extra ones? So we talked about this one in my video too, that the weird ones are all the ones that aren't sine, cosine, and tangent. So there's cosecant. So that's going to be this one. So they'll either write it as cosecant like that, or they'll use cosecant like that. It just depends on whether they're using the 5-letter simplify or the 3-letter simplify. So you know how sine is like O over H? Well then cosecant is just H over O. You just find sine and flip it upside down, okay? Cosine, its reciprocal is gonna be secant. It starts with a C, so we go with secant. So where cosine was A over H, secant would just be H over A. And again, you're totally allowed to have these down in notes next to you while you're doing them. And then cotangent is just going to be where tangent is O over A. If you're doing SOHCAHTOA, it's going to be A over O. So those are our main ones that we're looking for. Okay. Now, sometimes the testing software will ask you multiple questions. Like it might say for part A, go and find me what x equals. And then for part B, it'll say what's sine. And then for part C, I'll do that. And then for part D, I'll say like what's cotangent at theta. And they would just really want you to say, okay, I know x is 5. I know sine would be O over H. So this is opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. So this would be what, 3 over 5? And tangent would be O over H would be 3 over 4. And so this one would be 4 over 3. Okay, so that's the first part, is just going through and doing those types of problems. Okay, and there's a lot of them where they just give you a right triangle and they're just asking you the main trig functions. Okay, so when you're doing these, you want to do them as fractions when you type them in. You can do them as decimals, but and again, I put these all in the hints page that's attached to the assignment, that where the test is. Like for this one, I happen to know that that's 0.6, but if I put in 0.6, the computer program will give me it'll yell at me basically. It won't take off points because it knows it's right. They'll just be like, no, I don't like that. In decimals, you have to do a leading 0. So it would just make you, and it'll yell at you and it'll tell you have to put in 0.60. So I would recommend leaving things in fractions. Rationals I would leave as square root answers. Don't try to put them into your calculator and put in decimal answers. It won't like you for sure. And it won't take decimal approximations of radicals. So all of those are in your hints page. So I would print out that if you can and have it next to you of like, why does it not like my answer? That's probably why. Okay. All right. So yes, ask.
You have to move the radical to the top when you to answer.
For the most part, I'm going to say yes. There was a couple problems. So I was the person who was going through trying to do every wrong answer or every weird answer to see if it would let me do it. And then Mitchell was the one who was just trying to do it for speed. So it depends on the question. Sometimes the question would say, write your answer as a simplified fraction. And in that case, it would probably take 1 over square root of 2 because that's a simplified fraction. But if it said something like, write your answer as a rationalized fraction, then it only wants square root of 2 over 2. And if you try to write this, it will just give you another box to keep entering. They'll just say that, you know, like keep going, like you're not done yet. It's not rationalized. So my suggestion would be always just go straight to rationalize, and then you won't have to listen to it yelling at you. I mean, to me, it's kind of annoying after a while to have, you know, that you did the right answer and then have it. So basically what it does is it gives you a little box to write in, and you write in this, and it just gives you another equals with another box. And sometimes if it's nice, it'll write you a hint over here and it'll be like, you doofus, you didn't do this. Okay, so and sometimes they'll even give you a check mark to say, yeah, that's right, but you have to keep going. Like, I don't like your answer, you have to fix it. Cool, so it'll even tell you, you're right, I just don't like it, you have to keep going. So if I had a fraction like 8 over 10, it would totally tell me I'm right, but not let me move on to the next question. Why? Because it's not simplified, right? So then I'd have to go and do 4/5, and then it finally will be like, you are done with this problem, move on, click to move on. Cool. Other questions for me? So if you read the directions, it would tell you, but I think it's easier to just always go for the rationalized answer whenever there's a square root. Make sure it's not on the bottom of the square root. What else? Oh, we're okay.
So
yeah.
You had the latest, I saw your latest video about, I don't know
Inverses.
what it was. I was really, yeah, that
Okay.
confused. Can you like sort of explain it?
Absolutely. Okay, so if we are okay, I'm going to save that for the end, but I want to make sure I'm watching the time so I give you guys enough time on that. So I would say there's probably maybe 10 to 15 questions that are all some version of that I just did. Like there's a lot, okay, where it's just all doing right triangle trig, okay? Then there's others where they're having you do right triangle trig in an actual quadrant. So let's say I did the same thing over here and it was 3, 4, and 5. Well, then I have to remember that the 3 is negative every time they ask me to do a sine thing. And if theta is not given, it's always assumed to be at the center. So if they say what's sine of theta, I would go, oh, that's 4 out of 5. If they said what's cosine of theta, I would have to say that's negative 3 out of 5 for 2 reasons. Either because when I draw it, I know that to get there from the origin, I had to go left, or I could do my all students take calculus stuff, which is going to lead to our inverse stuff, right? So, and if I'm in second quadrant, I know sine is the only thing that is positive, so cosine should be negative because it's in quadrant 2. Cool? So there's also like another 10 or 15 that are just like this, where you have a couple negatives in there that you have to account for and be careful of because of the quadrants they're in. Okay?
What would be like what would, like, can you give an example of like what the hardest problem around this like sort of subject?
Sure. Depending on the type, I'll give you two. I will say they will ask for something like, what is cosine of pi? Now, no offense, but you could put that in your calculator and get the answer. But let's pretend you didn't, okay? So I would have to know that pi is over here. I would have to know what its coordinate point would be. And if I'm lucky, it might even give me a part A that says, give me the coordinate point for where it is. So I know that this is at -1, 0. That doesn't even make a triangle, right? Because it's right on one of the axes points. And then I'd have to know cosine is the x value. So I would say this equals -1. Okay, so those are the harder ones because they're right on the axes points. And you would have to know that this point up here is 0, 1. This point right here is 1, 0. This point right here is 0, -1. So it's not as easy to use. All students take calculus to figure out when it's a positive or a negative answer, okay? So let me give you a weird one. What is secant of pi using that same picture? So secant, I would have to know it's the flip of cosine. So if I take -1 and turn it into a fraction and flip it upside down, it is still -1. But if I asked for sine at pi is 0, it's the y. So what if I asked for the reciprocal of sine? So that would be cosecant at pi. Turn this into a fraction, flip it upside down, you get undefined.
So we have till Sunday night?
Yes.
We have till Sunday night?
Absolutely. And you can stop in bits and pieces. So, you know, do 10 minutes at a time. And when you notice the question type changes, stop and come back to it. You can exit out in the middle of a problem. It'll take you right back to that problem.
Sweet.
Okay.
There are a couple questions in the chat.
Okay. Hold on. I have to switch back and stop sharing to go and see where that is. Stop share. Okay, a couple questions in the test. Is the test multiple choice? No, it's almost all. There is a couple multiple choice, but most of it is just write in the answer. When we use a calculator, do we use radians or degrees? So you're always going to assume you're in radians unless the problem is asking for it in degrees. Otherwise, you're going to assume it's got radians in it. When will the test go live? It will be on the actual program itself on mathspace.co. Will go live at 11:45, and then you can access it anytime from 11:45 through Sunday. Going super slow and trying to give it all wrong answers to see what it would do, like when I tried to give it decimals when it didn't want decimals. It took me a little over an hour and a half to 2 hours messing with it on purpose. So I would expect that that's about at the high end how long it would take you if you went really slow and took your time. Okay, so pace yourself. Don't feel like you have to sit down and do everything in the span of 2 hours, like, and just sit there. You can do it in 30 minutes, go walk away, come back and work on it again, okay? All right, so can we get to the inverse stuff that I know a lot of people are saying, please do inverse stuff again before the test. We wanna make sure we've got this. Okay, so let me go back to sharing my screen. There we go. All right, so she said, what were the hardest ones? So those would be one of the ones that I would think are the hardest ones. And then we have a couple reference angle ones. So reference angle ones would be like, what's the reference angle of 240 degrees? So obviously that's going to be a degree answer because they gave it to me in 240. So if I know this is 180, 240 is somewhere in here. This is from one of Mitchell's videos. And a reference angle is always how far is it to or from the nearest x-axis. So 240 is under the 180, so how far away is it? So the reference angle for this would be 60 degrees. How did I get 60? I'm just subtracting the distance. Ashley, ask. You gotta turn down your mic, sorry.
I'm good, sorry. I was just
scratching
my arm.
Oh, you were just scratching, okay. So the reference for this would be 60 because reference angle just means how far from the x-axis. Okay, that was another section where there were a couple that I thought people might struggle with. You wanna try one more and just make sure we're okay? Give me the reference angle for -135. So I'd have to know negative means to go this way. -180 is over here. So is 135 in quadrant 4 or in quadrant 5? Well, it's more than -90, so it's over here somewhere. So then again, it's closest x-axis. So how far is 135 from 180? And whatever that distance is, that's your reference angle. It's always a positive distance. So I think that's like 45 degrees for a reference angle. Cool. So again, I'll post this video up when we finish so that you have it as well to go over if you need it. Okay, where you can exit out and come and check a couple of these if you need to. All right, so now we're on to inverse stuff. Yeah, I would say that covers most of the stuff. So a ton of doing trig on a unit circle, just in a regular right triangle, finding pieces of it using Pythagorean theorem, and then this stuff about reference angles or being within a quadrant. Other weird stuff it could ask you is like, in what quadrant are you where cosine is positive, but sine is negative? So that's just all students take calculus stuff, right? In what quadrants is cosine positive? Cosine is positive here and here because of the A and the C. Of those two, where is sine negative? Quadrant 4. So where they both exist. Okay, so there's probably like 5 or 6 that are like that. Just tell me what quadrant we're in based on hints. Okay, all right, so now we're ready to go on to inverse. Okay, so an inverse problem will look something like this. It will say, when is sine 1/2? That's it, they just want to know when. And we're going to do these in radians. Okay, so the question is, when is sine 1/2? So remember that table of values that I did for you in my video about all the different ones from 0 degrees to pi over 6 to pi over 4 to pi over 3 to pi over 2? And we wrote out all of our trig functions, right? Okay, so all of our trig functions would be sine, cosine, tangent. Okay, so if I'm at 0 for sine, sine at 0 would be 1. Did I do that right? Sine at 0, nope. Sine at 0 would be 0. Let's try that again. Sine is always the y, cosine sine, so it's 0. Okay, and then we go up by over 2. So 1 over 2, radical 2 over 2, radical 3 over 2, radical 4 over 2 is really just 1, if you simplify it. So remember when we created this table in my notes last time, right? Like those were, I think, in like either 4-7 or in 4-4, 4-3. Okay, then you do the exact same thing, but you go the opposite order for cosine. So cosine's going to start at 1. It's going to be radical 3 over 2, radical 2 over 2, 1/2, and then 0. And again, you could have this written down right next to you when you're taking the test. Okay, and then lastly, tangent, you're going to imagine they're a fraction right over each other. So 0 over 1 would be 0. 1/2 over radical 3 over 2, the 2's would cancel, and I would end up with 1 over radical 3, and you would fix that and call it radical 3 over 3. Okay, so what did I do there? Just to make sure everybody saw it, I'm doing 1/2 divided by radical 3 over 2, which is the same thing as 1/2 times, right? The 2's cancel, and I get 1 over radical 3. And then I fix the radical being on the bottom, and I get radical 3 over 3. Okay?
Would it still
Yeah.
accept like the 1 over radical 3? Like,
again, it depends on the directions, and so far we haven't even gotten to our answer yet. We're just building our little toolbox to help us with the answer. So our answer is going to be an angle. So
oh, okay.
cool.
For the
Okay.
oh, okay, okay.
Yeah. So this one, if I put the same thing over itself, I'm going to get a 1. If I put a rad 3 over a 1, I'm going to get just a rad 3. And if I put a 1 over a 0, I'm going to get an undefined for that one. Okay, so now let's go look for what they said. They asked us to go find when is sine 1/2, right there. So I know my answer is going to be some version of pi over 6. So I'm going to say that my answer is pi over 6. However, I have to make sure that the quadrant makes sense, because it might be a pi over 6 in first quadrant, it might be a pi over 6 in second and third or in fourth. All I know is this is the reference angle. I don't know what quadrant it's in, okay? So inverses was always about there's only one quadrant that works. You can't give it 2 answers, there's always one. Okay, so since this one's positive, my choices are sine is positive in quadrant 1 or 2. Well, which answer would you give if you can only give quadrant 1 or 2 answers? Wouldn't you give quadrant 1 because it's the closest thing to 0 and it's the easiest one, right? So this answer would actually be pi over 6. So you're like, Power, how do I know which one's the easiest one? Well, here's the deal. You're always starting at the angle called 0. Okay? So if I'm always standing at the angle called 0, I always want to go to the shortest, fastest trip I could possibly get to. So to get to quadrant 2, I would have had to walk through quadrant 1. That's dumb. Just give them the quadrant 1 answer. Give them the one closest to 0 that is positive or negative depending. Okay, let's change the problem and say, what if it's negative 1/2? So if it's negative 1/2, I'm still going to go here. I'm still going to say it's a pi over 6 answer. But now I'm looking for when is sign negative. So not first, not second. It's either third or fourth. Well, if I'm standing here, which one's the closest? Quadrant 4. So this is a quadrant 4 answer. Okay, but I want to tell them to go pi over 6 that way. So I'm going to give them the answer of negative pi over 6 to get me to quadrant 4. Could I have said that it's something like this? Well, no, because then you would have made me travel the longest possible way around the unit circle you could have possibly done. So they won't take something like 11 pi over 6, which is what it would have been if you started at 0, went through quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4. They want the shortest distance possible to get to that answer. Cool? So all I'm doing is I'm looking at the chart to figure out what fraction do they want from me. That's going to give me the reference angle. And then I'm going to use all students take calculus to figure out what quadrant I should be in based on whether it's a plus or a minus. And then I'm going to pick the quadrant that's closest to 0. Okay?
So what if you used CSC? How would that affect it?
Okay, so if it's CSC, let's say CSC equals 2. Okay, so I'm doing it down here on the left side. If CSC equals 2, then I know that its flip is sine is 1/2. And I'm back to doing the sine is 1/2 problem. So I'm not going to actually answer when is CSC 2 because that's a reciprocal, and I'm really good at finding the main 3. So I just change it into one of the main 3 by flipping it upside down. Now I just go and find when is sine 1/2 and answer that. So I have to know that cosecant and sine are flips of each other. And then I'm right back to where I started. You want to try a couple more and make sure we're feeling okay on these? Yeah? Okay. What if I asked you to go and find for me when is inverse cosine equal to 0? So if I go back, when is cosine 0? Cosine of 0 is at pi over 2. Okay, so I know my answer should be pi over 2. I don't know whether it's this way or this way pi over 2, but I know it's one of those ways. Where is cosine 0? Well, it's actually 0 at both of those, right? Here's 0, -1. Here is 0, 1. Okay, if you are standing here and you could only go one way, which way do you think is the right answer? Positive pi over 2 or negative pi over 2? You can only pick one. You can't give them 2 answers. Which one do you pick? Positive. Right? Because first quadrant, right, going this way is always going to be better than going backwards. So if you even have to choose between 1 and 4, you always pick the positive version over the negative version. Okay, let's try another one that's an actual fraction to help you out. What if I had the, let's do inverse sine of radical 2 over 2 and it's negative. So I would go look on my form, where is radical 2 over 2 for sine? It's a reference angle of pi over 4. So I know I'm going to have some version of a pi over 4. Okay. Where is sine negative? Bottom 2, right? Negative sign. So these are the 2 places where it's positive. Those are the 2 negatives. Do you think I want you to go this way, negative pi over 4? Or do you think I want you to go all the way into third quadrant negative? Closest one to 0. Cool? Okay. Does that help? Yay? Nod. Ask follow-up questions. Checking the chat here. Or you can turn on your What's that thing called? Your microphone, that's it. Are we feeling generally okay with so it sounded like people were the least comfortable with inverses stuff, which would make sense. Most people are good at remembering SOHCAHTOA stuff because that started all the way back in like algebra or even 8th grade, depending geometry. The inverse stuff, they really only do very little in Algebra 2, and your Algebra 2 teacher might have skipped it last year. So if that's the one that seems the most uncomfortable, that's totally okay. Go back and watch that video one more time. Try the work from that one more time before you go and do those problems on the test. They'll be at the end of the test. So you'll have time to go and look at them and go review it before you get to that part of the test. That feel okay?
Show the inverse of cosine 0 again.
Sure. Share screen. Do you want me to walk through it again and explain it, or just show it again? Because I'll post the entire video up on the Google Classroom for you guys.
Okay, I'm good. Thank you.
You're okay? Okay. Anybody else? So Eli asked a great question about what do you do when it's an inverse function? Do you want me to do one more inverse or reciprocal function where it's like a flip and it's not one of the main three of how you live with it? What if it was,
Can you do a cotangent example?
Sure. Let's do inverse cotangent of radical 3. Okay. So what do? I don't want it to be a cotangent problem. I want it to be a tangent problem. So I'm just going to turn it into a tangent problem of 1 over square root of 3. I just flip it. Now it's the inverse, or it's the reciprocal, sorry. So now I'm going to go up to my table and I'm going to go look, when is tangent going to be 1 over radical 3? Right there. That's at a pi over 6 answer. So I know my reference angle is a pi over 6. Now the question is, what quadrant do I put that pi over 6 into? So tangent and cotangent work the same way. So I'm just going to go check tangent. When is tangent positive? Tangent's positive 1 and 3. So if I'm standing right here, which answer am I going to give you? I'm not going to give you all the way into third quadrant. Whether I go this way or this way, it's way further than just going to quadrant 1. So the answer to this one is pi over 6. Cool. So anytime they give you the reciprocal function, just switch it into one of the main three so that you can read your chart.
What about when it's the inverse of cotangent 0? Would that be undefined, or would that still stay 0?
Great question. Okay, so if it was inverse cotangent of 0, then when I flip it to an inverse tangent, it would have been an undefined. So when I go and I look at my table, I go and look for undefined tangent instead of 0 tangent. So then it would be a pi over 2 type of answer. Right? Because if you flip a 0 upside down, you get undefined. If you flip an undefined upside down, you get a 0.
When I took the quiz for 4.7, it told me that it was 0 because it didn't have one that was undefined.
You were absolutely right. There was one question relating to cotangent, inverse cotangent, on that quiz that was wrong. And a couple students actually sent me emails and said, this does not look right. Can you double check it? And so I cleared it out. I redid the quiz pretty early on. So you should have seen a Google Classroom notice from me that said, hey, there's a problem with that one. And it was asking like multiple like stuff together, like what was cosine of inverse tangent of something, which we're not doing, right? So I took those problems off and I reposted the quizzes, the practice one. So you were absolutely right. We fixed that. There was one problem related to cotangent that had an issue, and we cleared out that entire quiz and restarted it and fixed it. Cool. Everybody else good? All right, so it should get active here in about another 30 minutes. If you guys are okay, I'm gonna let you go and let you practice a little bit. Okay, and I'm gonna look through the thing one more time before I let you go and just make sure there's not anything else really funky on here that we haven't already covered. So again, this is just review. I don't think this is anything new. If I said, what's cosecant of 2 pi over 3? Do you know how you could go about doing that? No picture, just the equation, just the problem. So cosecant is going to be the flip of sine. So I'm going to go find the sine of 2 pi over 3, and then I'm going to flip it. So this is going to be a sine. It's going to be a sine of a pi over 3 type of problem. So I'm going to go up to my table. I'm going to find sine of pi over 3. That's going to be a radical 3 over 2 type of answer. Okay, next step is I have to figure out what quadrant this is in. So 2 pi over 3. So 1 pi is over here. That means in thirds, this is 3 pi over 3. This is 0 thirds. So 2 thirds, here's 1 third, here's 2 thirds. So I'm over here in quadrant 2. So in quadrant 2, is the fraction radical 3 over 2 going to be positive or negative? So I'm going to do all students take calculus and go, oh, if you're asking me a sign question, it's going to be positive. So then to get back to cosecant, all I have to do is flip it upside down and then fix it. So fix the radical 3. I'll do it over here. So if I fix the radical 3, I'll get 2 radical 3 over radical 3 times radical 3, because I'll multiply top and bottom by an extra radical 3. And I will get 2 radical 3 over 3. So why did I do that flip is because they really wanted cosecant, which was a reciprocal function. So I did sine first, got an answer, and then flipped it upside down to get back to cosecant. Cool. All right, I do see that there's trig in degrees and in radians, so they all work the same way. Okay, and again, I don't have a problem with you using your calculator a little bit to help you. Just keep in mind that if it's a radical 3 answer, it will not take the decimal equivalent. So a calculator is a good check instrument. It's not a good do instrument. Okay, it's good if you're like, I think this is the answer, and you put it into your calculator and you figure out what the decimal equivalent is, great. But I wouldn't try to do this test with just a calculator for a resource.
So we do have to rationalize?
Yes, I would assume you're going to rationalize every time. There were a couple problems where it wasn't in the directions to rationalize, where they would have taken 2 over radical 3. Again, if they don't take it, they're not going to mark it wrong. They're going to go yes, but, and they're just going to give you another answer box and be like, I don't like it that way, fix it. Cool. The test itself does grade on partial credit. So sometimes it will put a little X before it and then give you a new box. That's its way of saying, like, you didn't do it right, but I'll let you keep trying. And now you're at partial credit. So if it puts a check mark in front of it and it lets you keep going, then you're good. They just didn't like the way you wrote the answer. You're fine. If they put an X in front of it, it's like, no, your answer was wrong. Go back and check it, but I'm still letting you earn partial credit now. Cool. So it'll figure all that stuff out. Okay. And then the only other weird thing that I noticed about the program itself is that sometimes it will do that answer box thing can be trouble. It'll do something like this. And you're like, oh, I know what they want. They want a fraction. No big deal. Sometimes it'll just look like this, where they'll just put the box without anything around it. It'll just be empty space, and they'll just put the box around it. Well, depending on what you were doing, they might actually want you to type in cosine of theta equals, and then put the fraction. Because notice it didn't have the equation in it. Or they'll just leave you an open box, and they want you to say b equals 5. And they want you to write the letter in equals. And again, that's on all the hints things. Everything we could possibly think of as I went through it and tried to make it mark things wrong, we put on that hint page for all the classes for HPC. Okay, cool. All right, take your time. It's meant to be a really easy test for you guys to do. Lots of questions, so you lose very few points if you just looked up the table wrong and you just did one wrong. Don't worry about it. There's, I think, 60 questions on this test to make sure we got everybody as many points as humanly possible. Cool. All right, and then do me a favor, when you finish it in the Google Classroom, put down turned in so that we know you're done. Because probably somewhere around Sunday night, knowing Miss Mitchell and I will probably be trying to hound you guys down somewhere around Sunday night at 10 o'clock to say, hey, you haven't started your test yet, you're freaking us out. Okay, so if you mark it as done for us, that will help us to know that you finished it and you're okay. Good? All right, then I probably will not talk to you again until after the break. I know you can't go do anything super fun, but like, can you try to like just relax and chill out? Like, you know, it's meant to be Online learning is not meant to be more stressful. I know it can be if you're just trying to learn this way and it's not your preferred way. But realize that all of the teachers are really trying to bend over backwards to make sure we get your best work and your best score possible out of what you do. Okay? All right, you guys, have a great break, and we'll post grades as soon as we possibly can. So you might see them actually go into the grade book during spring break if we can. All right?
Thank you.
Thank
You are welcome. Have a great week.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
We'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank